could Hindus do to take back control of this caste narrative that seeks to pigeonhole them without their permission, against their wishes, and worse still, to pit one group of Hindus against another, almost like feeding directly into the Breaking India plan as described by Rajiv Malhotraji? How do we take back that caste narrative, take control of it?
Well, I think we can. One of the most encouraging developments is that we now have generations, 2 generations, of Indian origin citizens, both in India and globally, who have mastered the English language to such a degree that they can articulate to the colonizer nations exactly what it is they have done and push them back a little bit to give us civilizational elbow room. So that's a very positive, got our own civilizational elbow room to do this. I think we need to turn to our own brothers and sisters, our own family members, all of whom have been victims of this externally imposed feud. And it's the classic Shakespearean sort of drama, isn't it? There was Othello with Iago, who was in the middle of the family plotting to wreak havoc and create friction. In a more contemporary setting, we had Grimer Wormtongue in Lord of the Rings for the younger people. This is a classic role of the person whose job is to wreak havoc through divide and rule. And so once we have ejected representatives of those mischievous traditions, once we have confined them in their own intellectual criminal tribes type encampments, then we turn to our own family members and face the trauma of what it is that is left. There is a huge amount of trauma on all sides, and this is going to be a difficult task. But I think we can do this. And once we have done that and family wounds start to heal, then I think we can collectively turn to the outside world and then face those who have done this and hold them to account. And the formula that I would use, and I insist on this whenever I'm speaking in situations where justice is being considered, is that first there must be recognition. The perpetrators must recognize what it was that they did. Then there must be an expression of remorse. After remorse, there must be some sort of an act, whether it's moral or whether it's in terms of whatever the value is that was acquired through violence, of restitution or reparation. That has to be done. And then we have reconciliation. What is not acceptable is to leap from recognition right the way through to what would seem to be reconciliation, because that's not authentic and it's not genuine. That is the scoundrel's approach, that, okay, right, we got it wrong. Our ancestors have built a world which is still benefiting us, but let's forget all of that and look forward to the future. That's a disingenuous, dishonest position. And that, I think, will be available to us once we ourselves have healed. And I see signs of this healing in many, many places. It's happening, it's occurring.
Is there a role for the state structure to play in India to play here? Because it seems like they've continued the same old colonial tactics to divide and rule, except now it's used for vote bank politics.
Deepika ji, do you have any contemporary study on this?
The only thing I would say is that words have power, and I think one of the ways that we start doing this is by stop using the word that was foisted upon us. So we have to stop talking about caste during elections. If you want to talk about a social stratification and social identification that are indigenous, jati is your word. Please use jati. There is no parallel in the English language. Use jati instead. That would be a beginning.
What a wonderful and simple starting point. And yet, as Deepika ji has said, words have power, and it's so powerful. I see a solution to this. I wanted to have an idea in my mind. What would a solution look like? And how would it then be described? And the phrase that keeps springing to my mind is that we have to dissolve caste consciousness. And I speak of caste consciousness, not jati consciousness. I'm perfectly comfortable with the idea of anybody in any jati being absolutely proud of what their ancestors have done, proud of the knowledge that they have preserved over millennia. There is no harm in pride and in diversity. These are the building blocks of our traditions. It's only harmful when the concept of a hierarchy, or indeed when the concept of prejudice based on hierarchy creeps in. And we do not
or
have
other
that
a
in our
fixed
DNA.
hierarchy, because I think hierarchy is as I mentioned before, a perfectly equal society has been impossible, even though people have tried to engineer it by murdering millions in our very recent human history. Hierarchy in human societies will occur, no matter however small, homogeneous, wealthy they are, like say the Scandinavian countries, they will still have a degree of hierarchy. That's human nature. Fixed hierarchy is something that has not been the case in India, and we should not try to impose that as a reality on India. That is a shame, and it is an injustice upon us.
As an example, you would be referring to things like the European royal families, fixed hierarchy.
Yes, the European feudal system has a fixed hierarchy. There's also, and in terms of social hierarchies, of course, there are many parallels across the world. People say, oh, this parallels the Indian caste system, again, based on an erroneous idea of Indian caste system. This is the Confucian order of scholar, warrior, farmer, trader, which is found in many Confucian societies, including in Korea, China before the revolution, etc., etc. But these are not caste systems. These are Varnic orders. In fact, these are Varnic orders. Calling them a caste system is a travesty. It's putting a wrong on another wrong.
If I can just pick that point up, I'm often reminded that Brahmins are at the top of this caste hierarchy. And I always say to them, okay, well, could you tell me the metric that you're using to measure top and bottom? And of course, there isn't one, because it's a complete nonsense. The only metric, and I mentioned this in my book, that I ever found which was consistently applicable was the level of threat to the colonizers and specifically to their religious missionaries. And the Brahmins were always the highest threat, as were the African witch doctors, as they were denigratingly called, as were the wise women of Europe who held the herbal traditions, the medicine traditions. Each and every one of these was the highest threat to missionary activity through theocracies which wanted to control power. And so they designated the highest threat as being the highest in the appropriate social structure. If you want a more contemporary example, it's worth studying what was done in Rwanda when the Roman Catholic Church did exactly what they have done to really apply a divide and rule strategy. And it was 800,000 deaths later that the Rwandans then slowly paused and reflected on what had been done. And the Roman Catholic Church issued an apology for its role in the Rwanda genocide. They have yet to admit their role in multiple genocides, but the toolkit is exactly the same. The policy is exactly the same. The British mastered it, as in their own records we see this, and this is why they are known internationally for their divide and rule policies.
That's a great parallel you just described, between the Brahmins and the African witch doctors being at the top because they're top of being the highest threat to the colonizers.
And it was a ready-made trope, wasn't it? You had these terrible women all across Europe who, remember, were responsible for original sin, which makes them all criminal at birth, a familiar sort of refrain. And what did you do? Designate them as witches. When you came across the same traditions of knowledge in the African areas, well, you called them witch doctors. You just transposed that same trope with all of its negative hatred. And that brand becomes a portable brand and applied it to the African knowledge traditions. And so, yes, the priests, the Bharatiya Brahmins and the educators, they were a logical next step in this this march of madness.
And that's why they're being so vilified and attacked today.
Well, it's that famous statement, isn't it? When the slave whips themselves, then the master's work is done. And what we sadly have is a whole civilization. Bharat is still replete with people who are engaged in doing the master's bidding, even though they don't know that that's what they're doing. And so, like I said, once we have the space to deal with this, we will then turn to our own brethren and heal these wounds and embrace each other, support each other, and then look outwards and rebuild Bharat in the manner in which our ancestral arc and the direction in which our ancestral civilizational arc was taking us.
That's great. Such a positive way to end the discussion. Deepika ji, do you have any final closing thoughts before we
No,
conclude?
I agree with Pandit ji that let India run itself would be a great way to. Indians are capable of doing it. They've done it for thousands of years. And I just wanted to add that also destroying the Brahmin, because so much of knowledge was not written down. You cut off a Brahmin's head, you can cut off the entire knowledge of a civilization, which has happened a couple of times in India. So that is why the Brahmin heads are important. And the vilification of Brahmins has been such a trope of trying to conquer India, which has been a constant sort of idea for the rest of the world for a very long time.
Yeah, so I think sounds like we should get back to Jati and Varna and dissolve caste consciousness, as you said, Panditji.
Navitaji, we have no choice. Varna is a darshan. If you look at any family, you will find that there are people who are intellectual, there are people who are courageous, you'll find that there are people who are naturally wanting to do business. You know, you get a 12-year-old who buys a packet of Mars bars from the local cash and carry store and then sells them in his school to his friends. You know, they're completely different archetypes, and they are natural because each of those functions is vital for any society to function. We cannot get away from Varna because it's part of who we are as beings, as a species. And so the sooner we learn to try and identify a person's Varna, which is what happens in every interview. Every job interview is a job interviewer trying to establish what the Varna of the person in front of them is. Once we can identify it, we then have a society whose job is to help elevate it to its heights so that the person is feeling fulfilled according to their aptitudes, and we try and make them fit into society so their skill set contributes the maximum to society. This is what Varna Vyavastha is. It's an observation. It's a darshan, as opposed to an intellectually constructed scheme such as socialism and capitalism and all of those isms. They've emerged from mind. This has emerged from vision. And so, yes, Bharat will get back to that place.
And it is an individual-based system, which we can see from the many illustrations of the Vishwapurush idea. And I want to look at the people who sort of think, oh, yes, because the Brahman is written on the head, it means that he is superior. And the Shudra is written on the feet, he's somehow inferior. And I like to see these people wanting to go around without feet. How can you look at a body and think, oh, the head is more important? I mean, how can you have a body and have that idea that somehow any part of the body is less important or less than another body part? So even with that perfect illustration of the Varna system, they managed to completely misunderstand it.
It just shows there's a motivated agenda.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.